So it seems that time of year has come back around as the NA Shuffle is about to begin. Of course, we've already had stirrings of this whenever we heard it was announced that Sean Gares was retiring from Cloud9, so an empty spot still remains there. Finesse has obviously recently been released from CLG, so obviously at least one empty spot remains there, if not the potential for other changes. And Jason Lake has been hinting on Twitter about building a new complexity team around Roka and possibly going old school, almost hinting at maybe a fraud pickup or something like that. And so things are beginning to be set in motion, but most of it is just rumor. However, what was actually confirmed was this idea of Allu potentially joining Liquid, and the build up to that would be him trialing for the team during this Road to Vegas tournament that was taking place, where a bunch of North American and EU teams were each competing within their own regions for one slot to compete in Vegas at the CES in January, where it would be just one European team versus one NA team, and they would battle it out in some type of best of 3 or best of 5 or what have you. And of course, it was announced even further back, right after Fragbite Masters, I think it was, that Allu would no longer be playing with NIP, and there was rumors that maybe he would wind up on some type of Finnish team, again, building some type of, all-star Finnish team, though I don't know if one would exist that would compete internationally very well. But whatever, that was kind of the rumor. Or maybe some other European team might be interested in Allu, but we have seen that Allu was trialing for Liquid. And so let's talk a little bit about what this means. Would this be a good move? Is this a bad move? Was it the right move? Because obviously the person that seems like is going to be replaced if Allu does come on the Liquid is Fugly, who has already mentioned on Twitter that he seems to be looking for a new team. So it seems like he's out regardless of what happens with Allu. It seems like Fugly has already packed his bags and is looking for something else. So let's just address Allu first and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that, as well as what other things do Liquid need to change going into 2016 to become a better team, and if the Allu thing doesn't work out, who else could they pick up? And also, sorry if I'm mispronouncing Allu. I think it's Allu, not Allu, so I'm gonna go with Allu. Anyway, so when it comes to Allu, he really seemed to make a name for himself back in August of 2014 when he played at the Gfinity 3 event, and this was like one of his debut events with Mouse Sports after time. And he had some really great games at this event, including a good series against Fnatic, while they ultimately lost the series 1-2, but he looked quite good in the series, as well as looking good against Virtus Pro, and Mouse Sports were able to beat VP on Cash at that game. And so this is where you really begin to kind of see him in a LAN environment. Obviously, he had some online presence before that where people were kind of picking up that this guy would be a great player, but this was like the first LAN where it seemed like we saw something of him. Now, he wound up being dropped from the Mouse Sports lineup due to some type of language barrier issues, apparently, the same ones that seemed to plague Mouse Sports with Nico before they finally just sucked it up and figured out a way to incorporate him into the team. And so we saw him play with 3D Max for a while, which was his Finnish team, and he played at the Asus ROG event in late January with this team and had a big game against Titan there where he dropped like 31 kills. He looked really, really good. But they struggled on the other best of ones at the event, and the team overall wasn't really considered that high tier of a team. He also helped this 3D Max team qualify for Katowice in February with some good games in the qualifier, including a big win over his former team Mouse Sports, which actually prevented Mouse Sports from being able to go to Katowice. But going into March, the actual Katowice event for 2015, this is when he gets picked up by NIP, who had been using Michael for a short time since Aspen in January and a few events. I think he played 5 events with Michael before deciding to drop him and trial out Allu and eventually pick him up. And his first event with NIP would actually be Katowice in March, where they would lose to Fnatic in the finals. But Allu does really well in this series in the grand finals, despite having some rougher games earlier on in the event against what was TSM, now TQM, and Envy. I don't want to go too deep into Allu's career here. It's mostly about just trying to talk about what it would mean for Liquid. But overall, Allu played 17 LANs in the course of 2015 with NIP, as well as a bunch of online play. And out of those 17 events, Allu managed a positive rating in 13 of the 17. So if you just look at his statistics quite broadly, quite generally, he looked quite good. It is true that in some recent times he did have some struggles here and there, particularly at Cluj, where he seemed to have a little bit of a rough patch of an event, but he looked really solid at DreamHack Winter. 2015, which is the Face It Stage 3 finals that took place here in late November. Had a great game with Envy early on, and just a good series against Luminosity despite losing to that team who would, go on to make the final. Also, in the last event that he would play with NIP, the last event for that team for the year, which was the Fragbite Masters, which just took place a few weeks before this video, he also looked quite good. They beat Fnatic in the upper bracket finals of this event, lost to them in the grand final in a 1-2 series, but again, Allu looked good throughout the entire event. The 8 maps that were played there by NIP, Allu only maybe had one poor map out of the 8, and just in general, Allu has looked like a great opera on this team. You have to kind of wonder if maybe it was the fact that NIP was just kind of slowly starting a downward spiral throughout, the end of 2014 and into this year. As, maybe it was a situation that could not be saved despite how good Allu was. Maybe Allu wasn't getting used properly. I don't know if he's really to blame for the struggles that Nip had throughout the year, but when you just look at him individually as a player, he looks like a great opper. I mean, sure, he's not an opper you would put like in your top 3. I guess people like Guardian and Kenny S and back in the day when Skadoodle was really hot, or maybe even Fallen would be considered in this picture now. Obviously, whoever feels like opping on Fnatic, usually it's Olaf Meister, it seems like these days. Obviously, all these guys are really, really known oppers and really, really strong oppers, and I'm sure I've missed a couple here and there as well. But Allu certainly would be probably at least in a top 10 of oppers in the world, I would think. And so, yeah, quite simply, he's a great opper, and this is something that Liquid has lacked for pretty much their entire existence. Ever since Liquid picked up this team, which I think the first event they played as Liquid was Aspen in January, back when they still had Naf and Doubts on the lineup before, bringing in guys like Elige and such later on. They've never had a really strong opera on the lineup. It's always been Adren splitting duties between in-game leading and opping. I guess he did op full-time for a little bit back when Daps was still on the team in-game leading, but I know Adren was still like helping him in-game lead a lot and trying to coach him to be a good in-game leader or what have you. At least that's the story I've heard. But the point is that this is something that Liquid has lacked forever, basically, and it's something that you can tell they really need. Because Adren struggles to op and in-game lead at the same time. And he's even mentioning he doesn't like doing both at the same time. So this has become a big issue. It's even caused them at points to experiment with trying to use Nitro more as an opera at one point in time, though that project did not go quite well, and Nitro eventually shifted back into an entry fragger position where he thrives. But that still leaves this gap when it comes to having a powerful opper that's going to be able to duel some of the best in the world and open up things for you and be just an added part to your firepower to, add a new element to your system of play that can yield you results or openings or just, good holds on sites, just whatever. So this is definitely would be a great move to bring in a very skilled opera like Allu. There's no question about that. Now, people wonder, should it have been Adren instead of Fugly? A lot of people are saying that because it seems like Adren has been one of the weaker fraggers on the team, surely. But it is also important to note that it seems like Fugly really did drop off a bit lately. He used to be one of the best players on this team, if not the best player on the team, back before like Nitro was really starting to find his form and find some consistency, and Elige to this day is still quite inconsistent. Fugly was kind of their rock. I mean, he was constantly, second or third on the scoreboard. He was putting up good numbers. He was holding his position on CT side as a side anchor on many different maps. But over the last, 4 or 5 events, even some events where they're just playing against pure domestic competition, like at RGN and iBuyPower Cup, he seemed to really struggle in recent times. I don't know if this is just a temporary rut that he will eventually find himself out of. I don't know if it was just the team environment was causing him not to play to his potential anymore. Like things started, crumbling, and maybe that affected his form. I'm not really sure. I think Fugly's still a good player, and he could certainly maybe find himself on another top team in NA, whether it be a Cloud9 if they're wanting to find a lurker, which is something that was a potential option if Fugly has played that role. Maybe you could see him go and do a CLG. There's all kinds of teams I'm sure would be interested in Fugly. It's not that he's a bad player, but he recently did fall off a bit. Also, this seems like with Fugly leaving, it opens up some spots for Hiko. You already saw just in the Road to Vegas tournament, Hiko's change up like a lot of his CT positions that Fugly used to play. Um, and it also changes what he actually will be lurking on the terrorist side. Back in the past, Hiko was always kind of a B-side lurker on Cash, for example. Whereas Fugly was doing that for Liquid, so Hiko's playing kind of like Suikidor. So now Hiko can shift back to a position he's always played. So maybe it opens up the door for Hiko to get more spots and positions that he wants to play. And it is true that Fugly was having a bit of a rough patch. So it's hard to really say. Maybe Adren would be the person you would take out next if this doesn't work. If like bringing an Allu does in fact happen, but the team is still struggling, then you might see it be a potential option to move Adren to a coaching position, which is, by the way, something Adren has always expressed interest in, at least in conversations to me. He thinks he would be a great coach. He likes the idea of coaching. I just suppose at this current point in time that he is more interested in continuing to be a player than a coach. But I'm sure at some point when he decides to hang up the mouse and keyboard as a player, I think he would shift to a coaching position. Maybe this will force him to do that if they get Allu and they have all these great weapons and they're still struggling, they still lack for a bit of firepower or skill or what have you, then maybe that'll finally convince him that this is the time to go ahead and retire as a player and move to a coaching role, which I think he would excel at. Also, though, I mean, in-game leaders have never really been known to be big fraggers, to be honest, but they still contribute in a very big way as an in-game leader. And I think some people say that, well, it's not like Liquid are that great tactically. It's not like Adren is this all-star in-game leader. And maybe that is true. Maybe he's not like the greatest tactician the world's ever seen or even close to it. I'm not sitting here saying that he's comparable to a Sean Garris, who's just kind of considered a mastermind in the scene. Obviously, we have a lot of in-game leaders that are currently banned in the NA scene, so we can't even go there. But Sean was obviously the cream of the crop for North American leadership, and I'm not saying Adren is that good. But when you look at his tutorial videos and his YouTube videos, when he picks apart demos and stuff, he sounds quite intelligent. And I think a lot of people have given him credit for that and said, yeah, when you listen to the man talk, he definitely knows what he's talking about. And it's also very true that Liquid have actually done pretty good on their terrorist sides as a team. It hasn't been their terrorist sides that has been their biggest problems lately. It's been mostly just the way they handle small number situations in general, the way they handle eco rounds and pistol rounds. Like, those are the two biggest thorns in their side, not necessarily terrorist tactics. And their CT sides have been the biggest problem. I mean, look at it. When you look at just the last event they played at, the ESL ESEA Pro League Season 2 event, they played Fnatic on Mirage and Cash. In both those games, they had decent terrorist sides, but the problem is on Mirage, they only got 3 rounds on the CT side, so it was going to be hard to come back anyhow. They wound up getting 5 on the terror side. Whenever they were looking like they were going to beat Fnatic on Cash, again, they had a great first half on T side with like 10 rounds, but just couldn't close out the game on CT. Same thing pretty much happened versus Envy on Cobble. Granted, they were using a stand-in for this match as well, but they had a great terrorist side. Couldn't get much going on the CT side. Same thing happened versus versus Navi at Cluj when they played on Dust 2. Again, great T side, can't close on CT, struggling on the CT side. You can go back even further against Virtus Pro at Cluj, as well as even versus NIP at Cluj. In both those games, they had decent T side. CT side struggled. Same thing happened in the PGL finals when they played against Fnatic. When they won that game on Cobble, was really based off of a strong terror side. So I feel like their T sides have actually been quite good. So it's kind of hard for you to say that they tactically aren't good. They look very disciplined. Their executes look pretty crisp, but they seem to be a well-run team. So I think you have to give Adren some credit there in leading the team. Granted, it's not just that. It's also the fact they have some great players, especially in Nitro, who's really come alive. He started out the year very inconsistent. Towards the latter part of the year, he's looked great. But yeah, the arguments can definitely be made whether or not Adren should have been the one out, but I think he still can contribute to this team as an in-game leader. And if it doesn't work out, like I said, move him to a coach and bring in someone else, but I think he still could be a good tactician for this team and running the team. So we've already established who Allu is, what he's done, that he's a great opper, that he would be a great addition to this team because this team has always lacked a great opper. It would add some firepower to the team next to guys like Nitro and Hiko and Elige on this team to have some good firepower to run things. So we've established all that, right? Now, what I also wanted to add here at the end is what else needs to happen for Liquid to be successful. And at the end, I'll entertain what can they do if they don't wind up getting Allu, because I think this situation is as much them trying out Allu as Allu trying out Liquid. And I think some other people like Moses has made this point. He made the same point about when maybe Get Right was rumored to join Cloud9, that these elite level European players are also trialing out the North American team to see if they're actually even going to be able to contend with this team in a top way. Because sure, part of it is just making more money than probably what they would make for some EU organization that doesn't have as much financial backing as some of these, rich NA orgs, sure. So I'm sure it's about money and opportunity in that regard. But I'm sure you don't want to go from, playing on a team that was capable of making semifinals and being a top 4 team in the world to a team that's completely off the radar. You don't want to drop off that far in caliber of competition, I don't think, as a player. So it is very much, back and forth, them trying out each other rather than just Liquid trying out Allu, I think. But now going into what else needs to happen for Liquid. Everyone apparently is now finally going full-time, and this is a huge deal because I know, for instance, Liquid was, I think, in Europe for DreamHack Winter, the Faces H3 finals or something like that. I'm trying to remember exactly how this went. I know that they were in Europe for one event before Cluj. I can't remember what it was. It might have been like Faces H2 finals or something, like way back in like August or like early September. And they went to that event, they played it, and then Nitro and Elige went home while the other 3 guys stayed in Europe for like a week or whatever at a Liquid team house, and then everyone flew back to actually play at Cluj or whatever. Or maybe it was between the DreamHack Stockholm event where they were qualifying for Cluj and then going to like a Faceit event. Regardless, there was some LAN that took place a few months ago where they had a perfect opportunity to boot camp between events, but 2 of their players had to go back home to take exams, and that was like a really huge deal. And obviously the other most apparent problem with this was the fact that Elige didn't even get to play the first best of 3 that Liquid played at the ESCL, ESCA Season 2 Pro League Finals. So those are the 2 apparent ones that everyone should just see right on the surface. But I'm sure this has also led to problems scheduling other matches, scheduling practice. I'm sure this has just been a constant hurdle that this team has had to hop over to make it work with these guys. And so, yeah, I think that this is such a big deal that this team will finally be all full-time rather than 3 being full-time and 2 not. That just caused way too many obstacles. It put limits on the team, I think, and so that is another huge change that needed to happen and is apparently going to happen from what I've heard. Apparently, Elige and Nitro will just be taking like 1 or 2 online classes, which are very easy to manage, and so that it'll make them way more open to actually being able to focus on being a full-time player, which in this day and age is absolutely necessary to be in top form for competition. What else needs to happen for this team? Elige needs to find some consistency in his form. He looked really rough versus Fnatic at the last event they were at, the Season 2 Pro League Finals. Despite the fact that Nitro and Hiko were putting up work in that big cash loss to Fnatic, it seemed like Elige was just nowhere to be found. Every time we watch Liquid play a best of 3, I feel like I see Elige have 1 good map and 1 bad map almost every series. When you look at the best of 3 versus Virtus Pro at DreamHack Winter, when you look at the maps he played at Cluj, it seems like he's just off one on one, and it just seems to go back and forth like this. And in general, he's looked a bit rough at recent events when you look at his total numbers. I mean, he played really poorly at like SIVO Season 8 and some of these other even domestic events. He just looked really not himself. And so, like, we've seen what he is capable of. We've seen games where he just goes absolutely nuts and drops like, high 20s or low 30s or, just absolutely, carries his team on the CT side or something like that. I've seen some games on Cobble on the CT side, for instance, where he's really just been dominant on that B side of the map to help his team through a game. He can kind of be that 1-2 punch with Nitro opening up sites, and they just kind of feed off each other. But, yeah, he needs to find some consistency. And here's the thing. Nitro seemed to be just as inconsistent as Elige when you looked earlier in the year, like the beginning of the year to the middle of the year stage. However, in recent times, Nitro has looked in much better form. He seems like he has found some consistency in his form. He still has off games here and there, but they happen way less often than they used to. Like, it used to be kind of like Elige, 1 game on, 1 game off. Now, Nitro plays 10 maps. He's probably on point probably at least 7 out of those 10 maps, nowadays, it seems. So I feel like he's really come around, where Elige has still really struggled to find like a solid baseline to his form. He just has really high highs, but really low lows. And so he's got to find either a happy medium or just bring his form all the way up, because he's a young guy. He seems to have potential. He's got skills, but I don't know what it is, if it's an emotional thing or a mental thing or what have you, but he needs to get it together, because he could be a great player, but he's got to figure it out. And I think maybe being full time now, he'll be able to focus on it more, hopefully. But if he's going to stick around this team, he needs to step it up, I think, going forward. And I've already kind of mentioned Nitro and Adren, so I won't talk about them. I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I think Hiko needs to pick it up a bit too. He has not looked like the Hiko of old on this team, especially in recent events. He can still make crazy plays. He can still be a crazy clutcher. He still has great maps here and there, and he has a good baseline level. But he's also dropped the ball quite a few times, I feel like, for the caliber of player that he is and is supposed to be. When you look at DreamHack Winner, when you look at the iBuyPower Cup, when you look at the SIVO Season 8 finals. Granted, these are some events where like the whole team struggled as a whole, but it's still not the Hiko we're used to seeing in some of these recent events. And I think Hiko even mentioned himself, after the SIVO Season 8 finals were over on Twitter, that he had played bad and he was disappointed in his performance and things like that. So it's not as if I'm just making this shit up. Apparently, he's also felt like he hasn't played up to snuff. So he needs to figure things out. Maybe with Fugly leaving the team and now Hiko actually being the full-time lurker for Liquid going forward, I would think, instead of kind of splitting duties with Fugly and taking spots he didn't normally play because Fugly was playing those spots because he was the primary lurker on the team. Maybe that'll help Hiko get into some better spots and positions he's more comfortable playing, where he can have more of an impact. Or maybe now that if the lineup works out like this, where you have Elysian, Nitro kind of being the more aggressive factors, you have Adren being more of a supportive rifle in-game leader, and Allu opping, so he's going to be more involved in opening up the map. This could put Hiko in more of a hardcore lurk role, like what he was famous for when he played with Complexity and Cloud9. So maybe this will, role-wise, will shift him where he needs to be able to produce the way he used to be able to, and what this team could really use from him going forward. And that pretty much wraps it up, except for this idea about what would happen if they can't get Allu. Because, again, Allu might be thinking, man, this team's going nowhere. I don't want to be a part of this. If they can get Allu, they absolutely should, because he's a great opera. We've already talked about this. But if they can't, I think an opera is still the answer for Liquid. I would certainly consider trying to steal a JDM if you can, if you're Liquid, since stealing Skidoo is probably out of the question. Steel G might be falling apart. Maybe there's a way to get JDM on this team. I think JDM's actually looked really impressive throughout this year, has gotten better and better from event to event, it feels like, watching him play. So that could be a person to look at. Other than that, it might be taking a risk on someone like Akusta, or maybe even trying to bring Shazam back into like a big top 3 team. He had his chance on Cloud9, didn't work out. He's looked better on Conquest. Maybe you give him a shot. Maybe you go after a fraud, like give him a chance, see what he can do. I don't know. But I think an opera is certainly the answer. And you still might need to bring in one for Adren at some point if the team still can't figure things out once they do find that powerful op. That might be the next move, but I think Adren would be a good coach, and he could lead the team from a coaching position, and you have 5 really strong fraggers. In which case, if you move Adren to a coaching role, and let's say you get Allu or some other opper, at that point, that's whenever you can bring back a Fugly for a supportive rifler. You could get a Cutler, which would be a huge steal. I think he's one of the better players in the NA scene, one of the most consistent when he didn't have to call. He looked great on CLG. Or try to go for another EU player. Alongside Allu. Pimp would have been a cool option, but he's on SK now. But, somebody like that. So, yeah, that's just some ideas about Allu, about him potentially joining the team, what he could bring to the table, what else Liquid needs to do to be successful next year, and if they can't get Allu, what else should they be doing? And that's just kind of a sum up of some thoughts on all those topics. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Follow and subscribe for more, and thanks a lot.